and welcome to yet another video by Deccan Herald. Today we'll be discussing India-Taliban ties and two press conferences that made more news than what was actually said over there. And to talk about this, I have with me senior journalist Smita Sharma with me. Hi Smita, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here, Viju. Thank you so much.
On October 10th, there was a presser by the Taliban foreign minister who's in India, who's on a pretty long tour around India. The press conference made more news because it did not allow women journalists to be a part of the presser. 2 days later, on Sunday, October 12th, another presser was held where women were actually allowed and questions were asked.
In Afghanistan, when will they be allowed to go back and get their right to education? And secondly,
on the October 12th presser, Smita was also a part of it. Smita, can you just give us the lay of how it was?
Which 10th October, essentially because Muttaqi was in town. And this is the first time that you have a Taliban foreign minister. I mean, so far, he used to be called the acting foreign minister of the Taliban. Now India, because it's upgrading its ties, so we have started addressing him as the foreign minister of Afghanistan. He came to Delhi, of course, via Russia, because there he was participating in the Moscow format of talks. And India has had to seek exemptions from the United Nations Security Council. I mean, Muttaqi has had to initiate the request, backed by, of course, India too. So he was able to come to India on this 6-day tour. It's a reset which is very important without a doubt, whether it's South Asia, whether it's the AFPAC region that we are talking about. So obviously we were all very keen to cover the story, and we got the hint that he was going to address the press. So we started dialing numbers because we hadn't heard from anybody. Normally the Ministry of External Affairs lets you know there's a press conference coming up, or a visiting delegation lets you know. And the problem here is the gap in the Afghan embassy in New Delhi, because that's literally been dysfunctional for the last 4 years since the takeover of Kabul by Taliban on 15th of August 2021. So there is a CDA here, but he does not recognize the Taliban. He does not follow the orders of the Taliban. And the Taliban has appointed another consul general who sits in Mumbai. So not all of us have been in touch with these people, honestly. And it's a very small team in the New Delhi embassy. So we were trying to find out, but till the run up to, in fact, the press conference, there was no word. The MEA also went completely silent every time we asked them about it, because it was very difficult to imagine that this embassy, which really doesn't have the wherewithal here, doesn't have staff members, could coordinate a press conference completely on its own. And there were speculations doing the round. So we had to wait it out till, of course, the morning when we started hearing that some of our male counterparts had got calls from the Mumbai Consul General Kamil, and they were given this time and place to attend the press conference, which was supposed to initially happen in a 5-star hotel, but I think there were issues with the permission. Then it shifted to the embassy and became a technical issue that because it was so-called, Afghan soil under Vienna Convention, the MEA didn't have anything to do with it. And when one of our male colleagues tweeted the photo of the press conference, that's when I realized that, there's no woman in the room. And that's when I tweeted the story. And sadly, it was a sad story to tweet about, but it just kind of got amplified and everybody started talking about it.
So from Friday to Sunday, that October 12th, what actually changed, and what actually finally led to a presser where also women journalists were allowed?
I think, my sense is, and while the Ministry of External Affairs did just put out a comment on the WhatsApp group of beat reporters saying that it did not have any involvement, but I think there was a lot of bad press going with Muttaqi. And the problem was that on the first day of the press conference, ideally, I think if he hadn't done this, a large chunk of the messaging would have remained on the India-Taliban reset itself. But it shifted. I think it shifted back to the very fact that he was trying to avoid in the first place, which is to do with the Talibani mindset, the misogyny, the complete invisibilization of Afghan young girls and women in Afghanistan. Because if you remember the first press conference that happened on Friday, and you had, I think, around 18 male reporters there from different organizations, it was quite surreal because Muttaqi was sitting in front of this painting, which represented the 6th century Bamiyan Buddha statues that had been destroyed by the Taliban first government. And incidentally, Muttaqi actually was the Minister of Culture and Information in that period, between 1996 to 2001. So the irony was like really stark. I think the fact that there was so much of a blowback is something that they had not anticipated, not just from women journalists, but also from political parties within India, women leaders like Priyanka Gandhi Vadra tweeting about it, or women leaders, like Mahua Moitra of the Trinamool Congress, or Sagrika Ghosh, who was a former journalist herself and is now a member of the Rajya Sabha. So I think it became a huge furor where people were not only questioning the Afghan government, but also the fact that the Indian government let this happen. And to me, honestly, Viju, I think that was the more baffling part of it. That even if I were to believe what the MEA is saying, which I still find unconvincing, the fact that they were okay with this happening, or they were okay with that this happened. I mean, they could
Yeah.
have issued a statement at least in support of the women journalists. So it raised a lot of questions because at the end of the day, while we are resetting ties, we need to remember this is not a relationship of equals, because you have a country which is going to be the third largest economy of the world in near future, and you have another regime which is yet to be globally recognized as a country. We have only upgraded our ties right now and said that we will upgrade our technical mission in Kabul to a embassy. So was India caving in really to Taliban at this point in time is what I think everybody started talking about, and that became the blowback point.
So that is the second part of the discussion which I want to hear from you. But before that, I'm setting a context for here. Smita Sharma has written an article for us, which you can access in Deccan Herald's website. It's Women in the Front Row, Setting Precedent for Future India-Taliban Engagements. Now, India and Taliban are actually meeting and improving ties at a time when geopolitical equations have all gone awry. You have a US and Pakistan, which is actually closing in ties, strengthening ties. He's coming from Moscow, as you said, Muttaqi. What do you read about this? How do you see India and Taliban improving ties at a time when India is yet to officially recognize the government in Kabul, and there is heightened tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan as we speak? Can you just give
You know,
us this? Can you just put the whole picture in place for us?
Yeah, I think one, we need to remember that, of course, this has not happened overnight. This has not happened in a vacuum. I mean, 2021, when the takeover happened, of course, India, like a whole lot of other countries, was forced to close down its mission and evacuate its citizens, its diplomatic staff, and some, of course, Afghan Hindus and Sikhs, who were initially, but they were very less in numbers. And 2022 onwards is when, of course, India decided that it had to get back into the game, because we were
Okay.
already invested in Afghanistan. The Indian investments were already past the $3 billion mark. And I mean, Indian investments had been over the years in terms of infrastructure building, whether it was highways, roads, dams, the parliament building, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi had actually addressed the then democratically elected government. So between the regime, between the governments of whether it was a Hamid Karzai or Ashraf Ghani, India has generated a lot of goodwill in Afghanistan, and which is very important from the perspective of India wanting access to Central Asia, which it cannot get through Pakistan. I mean, even to get access into Afghanistan is difficult for us, given that it's landlocked through Pakistan through the Wagah border. So that was the calculation that India went in for its investments through the Chabahar port in Iran, hoping to link that route up into Afghanistan, which has been used to supply wheat to Afghanistan, as humanitarian aid and assistance over the years, and then to try and be a part of the international north-south transport corridor running into Central Asia, access those markets much easily. These are all important calculations. Add to it the fact that we have seen this entire conflict blow up between India and Pakistan, the military escalation, Operation Sindoor that happened earlier this year, and then the common refrain, of course, is that the enemy's enemy is your friend. So at a time when Afghanistan and Pakistan, their tensions are so high, but which I would like people to be a little cautious about, because this is not the first time again that's playing out there. So people need to remember that the Afghanistan Pakistan enmity is not something permanent. And India simply cannot think that because it's upgrading its ties with Taliban, that tomorrow Taliban will break off all its ties, whether it's with Pakistan or even with China. Taliban
Okay.
also will continue to play these cards. So India needs to be careful in what it's doing. It's strategically important, I understand, because you don't want to leave a complete vacuum in the room where you were such an important player, where you had so much of goodwill. And post 2022, Viju, is when we saw the first meetings, the background meetings that started to take place. So JP Singh, who is currently our ambassador to Israel, he was the then joint secretary of the PI desk in the Ministry of External Affairs, which is the Pak, Afghanistan, and Iran desk. And as early as March of 2024 is when JP Singh actually had that first meeting with Muttaqi, which was a background meeting. Interestingly, in that meeting, there was a woman, in fact, official in the room. This time in the bilateral meeting between Dr. Jaishankar, the Indian side just chose to have no Indian women in the room at all, which, again has raised a lot of eyebrows. Anyway, so and then JP Singh actually later on in the year met with Mullah Yaqub, who is Mullah Umar's son and the acting defense minister of the Taliban. So Mullah Umar, of course, is the founder of the Taliban. Then we saw the formal upgradation of official talks happening at the level of the foreign secretary, Vikram Misri, who then met up with Muttaqi. And this culminated, of course, into this meeting here, finally, between Jaishankar and Muttaqi itself. But I think, of course, the foremost calculation is geostrategic calculations for India, because these are tumultuous times. India knows that with the American pressure and all the camps moving, you don't have any more allies and permanent friends anymore as far as the geopolitical order is concerned. People are just coming together and working together right now on the basis of interests, on the basis of issues. I mean, it was unimaginable that after Galwan, that last month we saw Mr. Modi in Tianjin for the SCO summit,
Yes.
being completely chummy with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and of course the Russian President Putin was there, and that these images would be used to signal against Mr. Trump, who otherwise the entire right-wing ecosystem celebrated when he returned to the White House, thinking that this is the best thing that could have happened to India because the Republicans are back and Mr. Modi's friend is back. But look at how those things have turned out. So I think there has to be a sense of cautious approach. Yes, things are important geostrategically, but I keep reminding people that please don't carry it away. Have a sense of proportion when you try and dissect and analyze anything to do with foreign policy and international relations.
Cautious approach, cautious optimism is what you would say. But I just have two questions before we wind up. One, how do you see the road ahead for India, Taliban, or India-Afghanistan ties? Where do you see it going from here? That's one. The second is, in your article, you've written that India is the larger party over here and Taliban needs India more. Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, because of course, Taliban is not recognized globally. I mean, there are, countries that have now followed the similar moves, countries like Turkey, countries like China, Russia, which have given the green light to reopening the embassy in Kabul. But they've also still now withheld the diplomatic, in fact, recognition of the Taliban. Those still require a couple of steps, but it continues to face sanctions. I mean, the very fact that for Muttaqi to be able to travel out of Afghanistan, he had to raise an issue with the United Nations Security Council because the Taliban is still a globally sanctioned terror group. Its leaders are all globally sanctioned terrorists. So they want investment. They are now in power. When they were on the other side and continuing to carry on with their terror attacks, militant attacks, that equation was different. Now, for the past 4 years, they are controlling Kabul. So they have to show some results. They have to show that, if we have come into power, things are changing. And things are changing geopolitically, Viju. I mean, let's even look at Syria, for instance. Some of the most baffling, interesting things have happened. If 2025 to me is another black swan event year after, I think, the pandemic. Because Al-Shara, who would have thunk, as we tend to jokingly say, that he would be dressed in a suited, booted, sitting in the United Nations Security Council, sitting alongside officials who have actually globally proscribed him because he was the founder of the Al-Nusra terror organization. So, I mean, it's always good to see erstwhile rebels, militants, terrorists wanting to join a mainstream process. But with the Taliban, honestly, I am not too sure that Taliban 2.0 can end up being very different from Taliban 1.0. Taliban sure needs India right now because it needs business. It needs investment because it's sanctioned. So it doesn't have business there. People don't want to go into Kabul. I mean, at the Muttaqi press conference, where his dominant message was that there is equal freedom for all genders, that education is not haram, And the other dominant message was that sab changa CG. Everybody can move around in Kabul. Things are good. Please come. Tourists are coming. Very difficult, to imagine and to believe. But he was brazenly lying through his teeth on these fronts. He needs India. India is the economy that he needs, and India needs Afghanistan from an economic perspective because also, remember, we are talking about critical minerals, we're talking about rare earth minerals. These are things that
Yes.
India doesn't have to supply. These are things that countries like China have, and which is a leverage which China uses when the United States plays the tariff cards. And
Correct.
it's easier to bully India compared to others. So India is playing it smartly. I mean, from and keeping in mind the one factor that unites all countries when it comes to their common concerns in Afghanistan is the fact that Afghanistan has been the soil for so many terror groups, particularly for
Mm.
India, terror groups that launch attacks against India and terror groups that can collude with the ISI. Because
So,
while the ISI is alleging that the TTP is targeting them, but there are all kinds of networks today, whether it's ISI, whether it's whether it's ISIS, whether it's Al Qaeda, you name the terror organization, and they do seem to have a presence in Afghanistan. So the larger
yeah.
mindset is also that let's try and keep at least these terror outfits as far as possible within the Afghan boundaries, let them deal with it, and we will try and help them as much as possible. So, which is why perhaps I think India has decided, unfortunately so, to not refer to the plight of Afghan women and young girls, which it has been raising strongly, and minorities also over the past 3 years. Nor was it referred in Mr. Jaishankar's opening remarks with Muttaqi, nor was it reflected in the joint statement. I am just hoping that somewhere it came up at least in discussions in closed doors.
It's a good note to end the discussion at. Taliban needs business, and that's why it's actually warming up to India. India needs Afghanistan for the minerals, the geopolitical advantage that Afghanistan offers, but it's cautious optimism that Smita you would actually suggest. Thank you, Smita, for your time. And for all our viewers, I would suggest you go to our website and read Smita's article. It details on how and what happened during the press conferences and looks into the ties between India and Afghanistan. For more such videos, stay tuned to DeccanHerald.com.